Hello everyone, let's get out our science notebook and we are going to be focusing on different changes in the earth. Now our notes yesterday were pretty easy and concise, simple. They were just talking about the three definitions of weathering, erosion, and deposition in our small group yesterday. We also talked about the different kinds of erosion and weathering. Now we're going to be talking about examples of those things that we talked about in small group. So I do not remember if this was included in your packet. So what you're going to do is I have it attached. You're going to print it out. I'm going to zoom out. Okay. And if you print it out, you have 2 pages that looks like this, okay? So you're going to take this page like this and you're going to flip it over. Make sure it's right side up, flip it over, okay? Then you're going to lay this like that, okay? What I would do is I would glue these 2 pages together, okay? So you're going to have this page. You're going to flip it over. Then I would get a glue stick. So you need a glue stick, a pen, some crayons, colored pencils. If you want to color, which I'm going to be, so why not? Usually I print these a certain way. So if you have it in your packet, just wait a second and fold, but I did not. So that's why I'm telling you how to do it so you can fold it. So we have the glue on it. I'm going to take it like this and I'm just going to line up the corners. So now it looks like a front and back page. It just feels a little thicker. Okay. So then you're going to flip it back over. So I'm going to do that again. It's going to be like that and like that. Okay, so you might have to rewind that, do that again, and then come back to this point, and then we'll start folding. Okay, so I'm going to take the corner of the ice, and some of the corners, if they're not actually stuck together when you glued them, I'm going to do that again. I'm going to take the corner by the ice, and I'm going to take it, and put it right here on the bottom. Then I'm going to take right here where it says slow, and I'm going to, do you see this line right here? We're going to fold it along that line. See how that's kind of like all the way to the bottom. When I open it, there's a line here, and that's what I want to line it up with. So now I have a funny looking triangle with a square on the top. That's a trapezoid. It's a funny looking trapezoid. It's a right trapezoid. All right, so now I'm going to take this corner here and I'm going to fold it in half to where this touches the corner by the ice. So I'm going to take this corner and I'm going to fold it along the bottom and the corner will touch the corner. So this is actually what it will look like now. So once I'm done with that, I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to glue these in, okay? So I'm actually going to kind of reopen it, there we go, and then close it, okay? Get any edges that haven't been done. All right, so we're going to be talking about the changes to the earth from wind, water, and ice. Now I will be back momentarily. I'm going to color this and then I will be back. All right, there it is colored. Okay, so I'm going to try to zoom in just a little bit more. All right, we're going to be talking about, there are slow changes that take they take a long period of time, so it's not super quick. Weathering, erosion, deposition, those are our slow changes, but then we also have very fast changes like volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and things like that happen suddenly. So we're going to be talking about all of those different kinds. And the first one that we're going to talk about is weathering. Now, weathering that we discussed, weathering, erosion, and deposition very quickly yesterday. So I'm going to review that weathering breaks it, erosion moves it, and deposition drops it. So all of this takes a period of time. Now when we talk about rock or earth, we're talking about the same thing, okay? When we say breaking down of rock or breaking down of earth, we're not talking about the planet, we're talking about earth as in parts of the planet that are made of rock and sand and things like that. So we're going to be talking about rocks specifically here. Breaking down of rock. We can have it go by wind. Like if we were to have wind and sand and it was rubbing down on the top of a mountain, and the longer that happens, the more pieces break off and the rounder a mountain actually becomes. And you can actually do this process with a sandblaster or in sand. We watched that on Bill Nye, where that happens, where the wind blows and it blows off little tiny pieces of rock, which are like the size of sand. And even though it's tiny, over a long period of time, that adds up. Also, we have frozen water. When water goes down into cracks, it will get cold and it will expand and then it'll crack the rock. Just like you put a bottle of water into the refrigerator and the freezer, it will get larger and it might even pop a lid off if it's overfilled to begin with. So that is actually what happens when water goes into rock, little pieces and cracks in rock, and then they get cold and they expand and the rock may break, or it may break in half depending on the amount of water that is in there. So we're going to do our mountain here. And then I'll be back. All right, so now that we talked about weathering, we will talk about erosion, which is the movement of sediment. Now, pieces of rock and earth are called sediment. So pieces of rock and earth are called sediment. So if we're moving the sediment, we could do erosion by water. So if I have broken off pieces of rock, it could be washed away by water. Or water can actually wash away so many pieces over a period of time that it's not just the loose pieces. It can actually cause weathering and then move the stuff out of the area, and that will create very large canyons or holes or cracks or little canals inside of it, so to speak, it would look like. Okay. So even if you can't see those little tiny pieces of things that broke off due to weathering, and it looks like the water is just cutting into it, it's actually weathering it, and then when it is moved away, it's erosion. Okay. So when it breaks off, it's weathering. When it moves, it is erosion. Very fine line sometimes between the two. Okay, now, water washes sediments away. All right, the next one is deposition, which is like deposit. It drops. So when you deposit money into a bank, you drop money off into your account. So we drop sediment into a new place. So if I have a mountain and the water is cutting into, actually, I'm going to use an example that Bill Nye used. He had a big salt mineral block. And in that salt mineral block, he had a hose hooked up to the top. And the water dripped down the salt mineral block constantly to the point where after a while, it was cutting down little canyons and lines where you could see the water going through instead of over the top. That is weathering and erosion. And then the pieces landed at the bottom. That would be the deposition. Okay, so it drops it in a new place. Fast-moving river will definitely move the sediments away. So here we are right here. We have the top of a mountain. The weathering is breaking down the rock, and then the water moves it down the side of the mountain. This is like an up close of this mountain, and then if it goes into the river, it will move it away really fast, or it will gather here at the bottom of the mountain, and that is deposition at the bottom. So rivers move sediment downstream because it goes along with the current. So the fast-moving, it says fast-moving river, and then the slow-moving this way. So we have our riverbed here. So we have wind, water, and ice so far that can cause weathering and erosion. Wind, water, and ice. Okay, so fast changes. Let's talk about some fast changes. Some fast changes could be like a volcano, or earthquakes, or landslides. Now, for those of us that are not familiar with volcanoes completely, I'm going to break down what happens in a volcano. And so we have a little bit of a background. What happens in a volcano is that there is a core in the earth, and inside of the core, it is liquid. Now, the liquid is called magma when it is inside of the earth, and then when it comes out, it's called lava. Okay, we're familiar with the term lava. It is very, very hot. It is liquid rock. When something turns to liquid, it is hot. Okay, so when there is a hole in the earth and the pressure from the vent is pushing it up through the mountain, it causes this magma to come up. So once it goes down the side of the mountain, it will cool into, let me see, hold on one second. There we go. It will cool and turn into rock, a kind of igneous rock. So we're talking about changes to the earth, not just specifically weathering, erosion, and deposition. Those are some changes. We're talking about complete changes that will change the earth, and you can't put it back. So once the lava erupts and we have a bunch of rock around here, that's how the Hawaiian Islands were formed. When it cooled down the rock, they created different islands. And every time it erupts, it adds more rock on top. So that is a volcanic eruption, and tying it into the rock cycle and how it changes the earth. Okay, so got my lava here. All right, so volcanic eruptions. Now, another one that we're not very familiar with in the area that we live in, but many places around the country and world deal with earthquakes. So basically, our Earth has plates on top of the magma. So we have the magma, and then we have kind of like these puzzle pieces, plates that are always moving on top of lava. So because it's on top of a liquid, it moves. If you think of like a pool float on top of a pool, it's always moving. So it's the same thing, but it's very slowly moving. And sometimes they bump into each other. And when they bump into each other, or they go against each other like this, or they pull apart, or if they bump in or crash, that causes an earthquake. And because the earth is moving, and think about what happens if you bump into somebody when you're running, you kind of stop what you're stop where you're going, and then you kind of bounce back a little bit. That's what happens with an earthquake. It's kind of like the earth is bouncing back. This is like a house. Okay. We have these poor little trees. Okay, so the pressure, they went together, they pushed up. So there's damage to the area around them that they can rebuild, but there's also damage around them that they cannot rebuild. And then the tectonic plates that it's moving around. So earthquakes could form a mountain if they go up like this, if they collide and go like this, or they could go one under the other or pull apart. They could create trenches, and those are things that you cannot put back. All right, and then the next thing would be a landslide. Basically, there's a lot of water and mud, and it piles up on top of each other so much that the gravity kind of just pulls it down. And as a result, it pulls down everything with it. And that is trees, rocks, land, houses, mud. And in with the mud is rocks and sand and anything in its way, basically. So that changes our landscape of the earth because you can't put those things back. Okay. So we have quick changes and we have slow changes. Now, a landslide is kind of what happens with snow and avalanches. They have so much weight on top of the snow that it just gives out. Okay. So we're actually going to talk about canyons and deltas and sand dunes. Okay. So the Grand Canyon formed when a river was cutting through the canyon over time, a long period of time, and it got smaller and smaller and smaller and was cutting different parts down. So you can see when moving water goes against rocks, it can actually cut through. Oops, didn't spell moving right. Moving water cuts through Earth's surface. Now, like I said, this is not overnight. This is a long time. And the canyons are constantly changing and forming based on if there's a river. There's no longer a river in the canyon like it was before because it had changed. But there are other things that are changing the Grand Canyon. And then we have deltas. Deltas form when water sediments are deposited at the mouth of the river. So let's think about this right here. It carries the sediment away, and then eventually it has to stop somewhere. Well, if there's no more moving water at the mouth of a river, then the water is actually going to stop moving the sediments, and then it is going to just sit there. And it's going to pile up and pile up and pile up. So that's what a delta is. Okay, and I'm going to color this and come back. All right, there's that. So now the last one I'm going to talk about is sand dunes. Now, sand dunes is when basically wind blows sand and then it collects all in one area. Okay, so this is sand dunes form when wind-blown sand builds up in one place. And those you will definitely see in deserts. They're just big piles of sand. And there we go. All right, so this is a list of different things that could happen to change our Earth permanently.